Приветствовать также тех людей, которые в разное время возглавляли наш антимонопольный орган. Сегодня будет хорошая возможность обменяться мнениями по поводу прогресса или вопросов, которые до конца не решены. В этой связи позвольте пожелать всем участникам успешной работы и благополучия и процветания нашим странам. Благодарю за внимание.
Большое спасибо, Кайрат Нимаш. Уважаемые участники, позвольте представить вам модератора сегодняшнего мероприятия. Его личность достаточно известна в самых широких кругах и авторитетна. Многие его знают. Это профессор, заслуженный экономист Российской Федерации, председатель Межгосударственного совета по антимонопольной политике, руководитель Федеральной антимонопольной службы России Артемьев Игорь Юрьевич. Я передаю бразды правления ее рук и уверен, что наше мероприятие станет плодотворным, с интересными дискуссиями, которые позволят обеспечить выработку актуальных рекомендаций в области конкурентной политики. Пожалуйста, Игорь Юрьевич.
Спасибо большое, Владимир Баянович, но вовсе не моя скромная персона определяет то, что сегодня у нас действительно звездный состав, прекрасный состав для обсуждения тех актуальных вопросов, которые являются сегодня одними из самых значимых, на мой взгляд, для формирования действительно эффективной экономической политики в наших странах. Поэтому тоже, присоединяясь к организаторам, могу сказать, что на прекрасной Астанинской земле здесь собрались люди, которые глубоко разбираются в той проблематике, которую мы будем обсуждать. Но понятно, что во всяком случае в нашей стране, в России, очень долгое время говорили о конкуренции как о важном факторе, но вряд ли понимали большинство наших руководителей, что это не просто один из важных факторов экономического развития, а фундамент развития экономики. И сегодня, говоря о таких понятиях, как конкуренция, добросовестная и недобросовестная конкуренция, вопросы, связанные с развитием конкуренции, охраной этой фундаментальной ценности, мы очень хорошо понимаем, что если эта тема недостаточным образом законодательно и на практике отстроена, то, возможно, мы обречены ходить по кругу и так и не добиться необходимой эффективности для развития в интересах наших граждан. И все больше и больше, чем я занимаюсь этой проблемой, мне становится понятно, что это действительно фундамент, правила добропорядочности ведения бизнеса, основа эффективности экономического развития. И это, по сути, гарантия поступательного движения вперед. Поэтому очень интересно не просто это констатировать, а, уважаемые господа, хотелось бы услышать ваши рецепты. Как сделать так, чтобы достичь действительно эффективности в этом вопросе, а значит в эффективности развития экономики, значит благосостояния граждан, от этого зависит напрямую. Как это развивать, каким образом это культивировать, как это защищать. Вот мне кажется, если мы пообсуждаем эту тему сегодня, то, может быть, мы найдем очень многие важные практические рецепты, собственно, деятельности в наших странах. Ну, а уж государственные чиновники, руководители соответствующих ведомств, конечно, не потеряют ни одного вашего слова из того, что вы сегодня скажете. И я с большим удовольствием хотел бы предоставить слово господину Роману Проди, который является авторитетнейшим человеком, который долгие годы работал, возглавлял и комиссию, и, соответственно, был премьер-министром Итальянской республики, которую мы все обожаем. Пожалуйста, слово вам.
Thank you so much. I have to introduce briefly, because introduction must be brief, a roundtable with the title Development and Transformation of the Economy through the Prism of Fair Competition. I spend very few words on transformation, on development, and transformation has been absolutely total. If you think that the starting point after the Second World War was the United States, 50% of world GDP, and United States plus Canada and Europe 64%. Now, US and Europe 20% each. China will, in a few years, arrive to the same level of United States. So you don't need to have other example of transportation, of transformation, And if you take even inside the different areas, Germany was absolutely out of any hope. Now Germany is by far the leading European country. So it's, we live at a time of transformation, you know. But this transformation, and this is a very constant fact, has always been got through a constant increase of international trade. If you take the statistics, the growth of trade has been always higher than the rate of growth of the economy. So it's been the driving force, not, let's say, an obstacle to growth, you know, even if, as we shall see, internal policy has been so important, you know. This has been a global trend, but with a characteristic, as natural, you know, but in the advanced economy, the regional, the intra-regional trade has been faster in the beginning than trade, global trade in general, you know. So Europe, NAFTA, we had some sort of regional development before having this period that is different, in which we have inter-regional trade more than regional trade. Of course, this has not always been the case. If you take, for example, Africa, a backward economy, because of the lack of infrastructure, because of backward economy and so on, the intra-African trade has been almost inexistent. All the trade has been managed and directed by Europe or United States, you know. So we have this typical case difference, but in the advanced economy, we had a progressive progress starting from regional trade. That, you know, I am stressing that because for Kazakhstan is part of the problem, you know, because it's not a country living in an area particularly developed, you know. So Central Asia trade is a problem that is from some way more complicated and difficult from what is the problem in Europe or in United States. Certainly, international trade was heavily influenced by the political situation, political split, the Cold War, the Communist bloc, all the, you know, there were a lot of, let's say, disguised routes of international trade, but the progress was going on in spite of the Cold War, in spite of all the division. How fair? This is difficult to say, yeah? The title say fair international trade. Fair international trade is always fair and always not fair, because there are continuous political influence, distortions, and all of that, you know. And everybody of you, better than me, because I am not a technical expert of international trade, know how the governments manage and try to distort the international trade. And this is what is happening is like that. But in this regional growth of the trade, I stress the importance of what I call the Asian cluster. This is the moving center of the new economy. And when I mean Asian cluster, I don't mean China only. I mean Asian cluster. In spite of all the political problems, in spite of fightings of the trade, regional trade between Japan, South Korea, China, and neighbor countries is increasing much more than world economy. You know, so it's stronger than the political constraints, and it's becoming step by step. Also because the different nature of the different countries is becoming the center of the world. Let's say, it's not exaggerated to say the new manufacture of the manufacturing of the world. The example is clear. I don't quote statistics, but when you have an earthquake in Japan and hundreds of companies stop in China because of that, you understand easily what is about this new reality. And how fair, even in this case, is difficult because there is a deep influence of the government policies, and as it's always been the case. Government influence is, first of all, of course, custom, but this is very clear and simple to understand. But if you think to technical obstacles, non-tariff barriers, sanitary control, there is a list of endless government policy. But in spite of that, I repeat, the trend has been always in two periods, at least in the leading countries. Till the 80s, there was a substantial and open government intervention with not so many objections. It was like a doctrine that the government, they had the right to manipulate the international trade. Starting from the 80s, well, and the subsidizing industry was a permitted rule, let's say, a common rule. Starting from the 80s, let's say, if you want to take names, you take Thatcher and Reagan, the doctrine was just the reverse. It was baptized as a bad habit, the intervention of the government, but clearly, and by consequence, industrial policy became a dirty word, and no clean economist used this word anymore, But the government did in the same industrial policy, had intervention, especially in the nascent industry, the new industries, We can list a policy that was very active even in this period. And, but because of the shift of industry to the let's say, backward areas from industrialized country to backward area in Europe, from the same in Latin America to Mexico, but especially to Asia, because of the increasing unemployment that we have in many advanced countries. Now, industrial policy is not anymore a dirty word. It's coming back again in a completely different manner, not anymore, let's say, barriers, not anymore evident technical aspect, but industrial policy much more sophisticated, research and innovation, training, taxation, financial incentives, and so we have still a deep influence on international trade, but indirect influence of that. And I do think, to end this, that a trade without rules is impossible. But in any case, a completely fair trade is also impossible or very, very difficult. The intervention of the government in the more sophisticated way, because of unemployment, because of the deep internal political problems, it is with us. It is with us always, And so, but in spite of that, the correlation between trade and growth is still there. Even now, with all this, let's say, political change, with all this intellectual change, the correlation, the positive correlation between trade and growth is still the characteristic of the modern world. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, господин Броди, за ваш великолепный обзор. Мне кажется, многое из того, что вы сказали, является и сегодня актуальным, и направленным в будущее. Во всяком случае, во многих странах эти проблемы должны быть, наверное, осмысленны. Вот одна из тем, которую вы затронули, вы сказали о вмешательстве правительства. Ну, понятно, что когда правительство и парламент устанавливают определенные правила игры, без них не может развиваться конкуренция и нормальная свободная торговля. Установление правил – это хорошо. Но у нас во многих случаях государство продолжает, я имею в виду Россию, например, субсидировать государственные компании, предоставляя им таким образом эксклюзивные и неконкурентные возможности занимать целые рынки. Частный бизнес, пытаясь выйти, например, на рынок транспортного обслуживания населения, сталкивается с тем, что какая-нибудь государственная компания получает из бюджетов разных уровней половину своих доходов. И частные компании, которые хотели бы выйти на этот рынок и за частные деньги оказать услуги, может быть, даже гораздо более высокого качества, не могут войти на этот рынок, потому что существует барьер в виде этих субсидий, и вы упоминали такого рода политику субсидий. Но я хотел бы предоставить слово сейчас легендарному человеку, профессору Принстонского университета, лауреату Нобелевской премии по экономике 1994 года, господину Джону Нэшу, может быть, вот именно из больших научных представлений, может быть, вырастают какие-то рекомендации, советы для развивающихся экономик. Было бы очень приятно об этом услышать.
As well as simply economics, it's what should be legal, what should be illegal. I have been an observer of some of the issues, like when the computer company Microsoft was taken up in Europe, and many consequences that came from this. As my understanding of the history of regulation of monopolies, it really was led in the United States with advance of Europe. At the time, it was in, I think, the 19th century. There was first something called the Sherman Act, and this was considered to outlaw trust. It was called antitrust. The trust is sort of a legal formulation. You could create a theoretical individual, or like a corporation is a theoretical person. The trust would own, and maybe would represent several ownerships coming together and being entrusted to one management. And so that there was popular opinion at that time that there was great exploitation by monopolies. And if you had only one piano maker, then everyone would have to buy a piano at a high price. It's that sort of thing. And then there was the Clayton Act that followed afterwards and refined the Sherman Act to some extent. I can't really tell anything about the details of that. I think, though, that Senator or Congressman Sherman was a Republican, and Senator or Congressman Clayton was a Democrat. And then this was around near the end of the 19th century or beginning of the 20th century. And now later on in Europe, in the European Union, there's developed something that is not described as antitrust regulation, but it is the regulation of competition, and it's possible to bring a lawsuit within European procedures against an accused monopolist. And so the American computer company, Microsoft, was charged in Europe with being a monopolist of that sort, you know. Now we know on a common sense level that Microsoft has had a monopoly on what's called Windows for a long time. And they also had Microsoft Word, which is a text processing thing. And that Word displaced a very good but private program which was called Word Perfect. And that was replaced by Microsoft Word, which became the standard. And people want to communicate, you make these texts, you need to have something that works practically. So it's very easy for a monopoly to become a practical thing. Now, I think Microsoft ultimately reached a deal with their European litigation, but it came down to some American courts in which they seem to get a lot of sympathy just from my observer's position. Now, I noticed that this description of the anti-monopoly doesn't seem to involve so much a legal angle as if there would be a type of monopoly practice which would be defined to be illegal such that anyone, like maybe any citizen or any legal entity in the area could bring a charge of monopoly and seek a prosecution. But it's all to be administered by government agencies. If it is like that, then I see a tremendous possibility for